Well, good afternoon. My name is John Lesko, and thanks for joining us today on your Friday. Hope everybody's heading towards what looks like a good weekend. And I'm just thrilled today to be here with Chuck Smith. Dr. Smith is a good friend of mine personally, and a good friend to addicts, people in recovery, and people in the Florida Lawyers Assistance Program. So, as you all know, we're here from Florida Lawyers Assistance today, the confidential agent for the Florida Bar, giving confidential assistance to attorneys who may sense they are struggling or know they are struggling with substance use or a mental health issue. So, you know, if you're new to FLA and you're not quite sure about confidentiality, you can call us. Just call. Calls are confidential. Everything is protected by a Supreme Court confidentiality mandate for any caller, as well as a Florida bar rule that prevents us from releasing any information about callers. That anonymity is removed in cases where lawyers don't make the call and end up getting in trouble first. So what happens in those cases is people get in disciplinary problems, the Florida Bar gets involved, then when they get sent to us, it's as a condition of discipline. So we encourage you, by all means, look out for yourself, your colleagues, your friends, the people you care about. It's good for people, and it's really good for business. Happy lawyers, healthy lawyers are more productive lawyers. It helps the bottom line. So with that, I'm going to move on to today's presentation. Now, I do want to give a plug for our Wednesday stress relief meeting for lawyers. You can find it online. We have Wednesdays are practicing attorneys or licensed attorneys. Tuesdays are for law students. Fridays are for mothers practicing laws. That's a whole set of other challenges in addition to a career. So I just want you to encourage people to join us. Stress relief groups are facilitated by our PhD on-staff psychologist, Scott Weinstein, as well as Lauren Morris, who's a licensed mental health counselor, and she's just wonderful as well. And, you know, you can go in there and talk about any issue that's bothering you. It can be the practice of law and legal practice issues, but it can also be finances, kids who are driving you crazy, or whatever else might be on your mind and making it difficult to focus, to practice, to succeed, and really just to be happy. That's what FLA is about, because when we take care of ourselves and we're more fulfilled and we're happier, you know, that just makes a better environment in the legal community. It's nice to be opposing a lawyer who's healthy and happy and can fight while dealing with you reasonably and in a respectful manner. So, with that, let's move on to a little note I have here on Dr. Smith. I know him well because we work together, and we're in the addiction treatment world as colleagues. So, like I said, I know Dr. Smith really well, and we're longtime friends from the University of Florida, where he went through his addiction training. You know, Dr. Smith worked as a family practitioner for 26 years, and if you're like me and you're one of us, being someone who has suffered from a substance use disorder in the past and substance abuse issues, you'll be happy to know Dr. Smith came to this field honestly. He came to this honestly. He suffered his own experiences with substance use as a practicing physician, and it, like many of us, it ravaged his life and took a lot from him. And he responded to that by trying to give back to other people and help out. So Dr. Smith is an expert on biological aspects of addiction and the intricate effects of alcohol and mind-altering substances on the brain. So how things affect the brain. And, you know, he can explain today the natural disease processes which affect our brains, affect our behaviors, and make it very difficult for us to stop using, and more importantly, stay stopped if substances are really getting in the way of our lives. So, like I said, Dr. Smith received his specialty addiction training through the Addiction Medicine Fellowship at the University of Florida. He's treated patients there, and he was also one of the medical team members at DACO of Tampa, treating hundreds and thousands of people there at all levels of care, and people of all socioeconomic standing and status. So really is neat to know a guy like Chuck Smith, and I hope you enjoy his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that introduction. Today's talk is going to be about a book that I wrote with Dr. Jason Hunt that came out this summer. And to tell you a little bit about what spurred this book, as John told you, I had been a family practice physician in West Virginia 26 years until back, John. My Wi-Fi went out. Okay, can you hear me now? Ah, good. Okay, thanks. We had a Wi-Fi glitch there. But as I was saying, when I went to treatment myself in 2009, went through the interview process and the history and physical and the psych evaluation, and the professionals in Alabama told me, well, you have a disease. My response was, okay, you know what, you guys got me. I drank too much. I've drank too much for a long time. I'll quit if that's everyone's consensus. And I got addicted to those prescription medications, but you know, I had a sample cabinet full of them, so that could happen to anyone. Well, it turns out that actually doesn't happen to anyone, because there's literally thousands and thousands of doctors all across the country that had prescription drugs in their sample cabinets, of Lortab, Vicodin, Adderall, etc., and they didn't take them and they didn't experiment with them. So that really spurred me to once I found good solid recovery myself and went to treatment, to try to back that up, that yes, this is a disease, and it's a disease that can have an excellent prognosis as long as we have patient compliance and they get good treatment. This was a landmark article that came out in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2016, primarily authored by Dr. Nora Volkow, who is the medical director of National Institute of Drug Abuse. This article put us in mainstream medicine all across the country and all across the world as a disease, and gave a lot of the specifics about the disease. Of course, this particular article wasn't written for lay people. It was written for physicians and PhDs and neuroscientists, but it was a landmark article, and it really brought us to the forefront in acceptance in the medical world. So here we go. Is addiction a disease? A definition of disease is a disorder in a living animal or plant that typically produces specific symptoms and impairs normal functioning, illness, malady, or sickness. But let's examine the definition of disease. Most dictionaries seem to agree that it's a condition that results in the disorder of a structure or function of an organ that causes specific signs and symptoms. Hopefully, you can see that addiction, by the end of our talk, is a disorder of the brain's reward system, causing all manner of physical and emotional problems, potentially leading, if left untreated, to death, and no less a disease. So let's just say the word. It may, in fact, be an affliction, a malady, an abnormal condition, or disorder. It may be all these things, but it is also unquestionably a disease. It is important that we understand the main system in the body that goes awry for this disease. And it turns out it's the dopamine reward system. This system actually comes into play in the first few hours of life. We have a newborn infant. He's in the nursery. He's went through the trauma of childbirth. He gets wrapped up and he's laying there in the incubator or in his crib. And in a few hours, that little baby's going to start crying. When I'm doing this in front of a live audience, I usually poll the group, why is this baby crying? I get all sorts of answers. I get, well, he wants hugged. He's cold. He peed his pants. Maybe the doctor slapped him on the butt too hard. I get all sorts of answers. But interestingly, the mothers in the crowd usually know he's hungry. And then I asked them, you know, this infant's a couple hours old. How does he know he's hungry? And I get a lot of answers, belly pain, what we would call hunger pains. But the bottom line is he becomes restless, irritable, and discontent. A few phrases that most of you may recognize out of the doctor's opinion of the big book. So here's why this newborn person, this infant, becomes restless, irritable, discontent. There's 4 terms that I need you to know, and they pertain to the brain and the chemistries. First one is corticotropin releasing factor, or the stress hormone that's released in the brain as a result of physical or emotional stress. The second is our reward neurotransmitter, which is dopamine. 2 brain parts now we're going to talk about. One is the midbrain, also called the limbic system. The other is the prefrontal cortex, which is our decision maker of the brain. This system that exists in the midbrain results in release of dopamine anywhere from 0 to 200. You'll see on the graph I've written a line out from 0 at 0. I have one at 100, one at 200. A resting state of comfort and serenity in the midbrain of that newborn infant is 100. Now, in a few hours, when he becomes hungry, cortisone releasing factor is released. It's the stress hormone. What it does is drives the dopamine tone lower. In fact, it gets down very low in the 0 to 10 range. When it's in that range, there's no comforting this baby or any other individual. He's restless, irritable, discontent. It's our survival system. This baby brain senses that he will die if he doesn't get carbohydrates. So naturally, he gets carbohydrates. And here's what happens. He gets a dopamine release in the midbrain, goes up and approaches 200, but it does not go over 200. Well, there we start learning the learning process of humans. This pattern continues on through life. You get hungry, you become restless, irritable, discontent. at least until you get older. And most of us in modern day world, we don't wait till we're terribly hungry. We just eat at selected periods of time so that we don't become more restless, irritable, discontent. This system also is affected by, here's the example of food that we get food, it goes up to over 150, closer to 200, then 1 hour, 2 hours, an hour and a half away, it starts to drop back down. And as I said, that system continues. It also continues with any life-sustaining behaviors. For example, drinking fluids when you're thirsty, escaping danger, interacting with other individuals. Oxytocin release stimulates dopamine release from physical touching. Anything that helps sustain human life, including sex, causes dopamine releases up to 200. And where that release happens, as you can see here, is in the nucleus accumbens and the VTA, which is ventral tegmental area of the brain, the midbrain. This would be our survival system of the brain, also called the limbic system. This system is powerful, it's survival based, it results in motivation. It's really an unconscious decision. There's no free will involved here. You can't decide if you're going to be restless, irritable, discontent or not. It's influenced by cortisone releasing factor and by dopamine levels. Also, when the limbic system becomes activated, our decision-making portion of our brain, the frontal cortex, becomes deactivated. We'll talk more about that later. Strong sensory and memory linkage. We learn to remember things that help sustain our life. That would be behavioral learning. It's also involved in body movement control. Heightened attention and focus on reward attainment. Items that give us dopamine releases are logged into memory, as well as what we heard, what we saw, what we tasted. Any of our senses that were going on at the time are logged into memory and related to a positive dopamine release. So that's the dopamine reward system in good health. And as you can see here, once again, there's a baseline of 100 and releases up to 200 happen with food, escaping danger, water, exercise, or sex. Enter in mind-altering substances. For many of us, nicotine in teenage years is a gateway drug and the first drug that we may be exposed to that actually elevates past normal or past what the system can hold as far as dopamine release. Nicotine causes dopamine to be released at 225. This is for a system that's only made to tolerate 200. Then the big boys come along. Cannabis, alcohol, benzodiazepines, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, anywhere from 300 to 1,000 release of dopamine. So we're talking 2 all the way up to 10 to 12 times normal release of dopamine, a massive release of dopamine associated with these chemicals.
Hey, Chuck, excuse me, your slide screen minimized, it's tiny. The screen sharing somehow flipped a little bit. And the good news is people want to see it because I'm getting chat messages.
All right, let's see. Wonder what we can do.
It says viewing speaker but not screen, and someone suggested switching screens.
Oh, my wife's listening now because I had earbuds. He said that the screen minimized. We needed to get big again. They said maybe switch screens. Could we do a new share maybe?
Let me see if I can do share.
They were viewing the speaker but not the screen. Now.
And now.
How about now?
Now we're seeing the big old slides.
Good. We'll go back to where we were.
And to all attendees, if you have any questions, I'm sorry I didn't mention this earlier, please type them in the chat. Dr. Smith has reserved time for question and answer at the end, and I will be happy to read him any questions that are submitted. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that little glitch, but here we have the massive amount of dopamine release that occurs with mind-altering substances, particularly cannabis, alcohol, benzos, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine. And I was just getting ready to mention there are some studies that show with intravenous methamphetamine, dopamine releases approach 3,000. So at that point, we're talking 15 times anything that the system was built to handle. Discussing this with patients and families, a lot of times I equate this to noise exposure hearing loss and ask them, what can you hear the next day after going to a rock concert? Well, of course, they say I don't know why my Wi-Fi keeps going out.
One of the hazards of doing these things from home.
Yeah, I agree. Can you see everything now?
All good, Chuck.
Okay. So as I was saying, a good example is noise exposure hearing loss. And the phenomena that actually occurs is called downregulation of the receptors. So that's the phenomena of tolerance. After you've drank over a period of time, used cocaine, meth, heroin over a period of time, you simply don't get the reward that you used to simply because the receptors just cannot receive it anymore. Similar to the phenomena that happens with noise exposure hearing loss. So as I was learning about this phenomena, this disease of addiction, disease of the dopamine reward system, I wanted to know, well, who is likely to get this and why do they get it? So here's what we know, risk factors. Always when I'm telling patients, you know, if I go in any ICU across the country and I see a fellow laying there with a heart attack, I say, let me guess. I bet you heart disease ran in your family. I bet you've had someone else had a heart attack. Let me guess. I bet you smoke cigarettes. Let me guess. I bet you have high blood pressure. Let me guess. Maybe you have adult diabetes or juvenile diabetes. Let me guess. I bet you have high cholesterol. Let me guess. Your idea of exercise is using a remote control while you're watching TV. Sedentary lifestyle. You know, you're not going to ask a heart attack patient those questions and get no's. Those are easily and well-known, recognizable risk factors for who gets coronary artery disease. This disease is no different. It becomes very predictable who's going to get the disease of addiction. The very first risk factor is genetics. If you have a primary or secondary relative who has the disease of addiction, you have 50% chance of having it. When I'm talking to junior high or high school kids, I say, you know, if the plane between Atlanta and Miami crashed 50% of the time, would you get on the plane? Of course they wouldn't. Age, and by here, I mean age of early use. The dopamine reward system doesn't mature until age 24. Both myself and most of the clients that I deal with began as teenagers, some even pre-teenagers, with cannabis invading junior highs. alcohol being readily accessible, as well as prescription drugs from home. When you begin using at an early age, that system simply isn't built to take it yet, and it's a big risk factor. Also, another one, adverse childhood experiences. In the book, we actually have a table. Adverse childhood experiences range anywhere from physical, emotional, or sexual abuse as a child, as well as bullying, other stresses in childhood. If you've had a parent who was incarcerated, a spousal abuse syndrome, many things are considered adverse childhood experiences, and they highly increase your liability and your risk of having substance use disorder. Comorbidity. If I have any psychiatric diagnosis, such as generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, schizoaffective or schizophrenia, even dysphoria, any of those markedly increase my risk of substance use disorder. High tolerance to the substance. What, at least in many aspects of our society, is looked at as an admirable quality, high tolerance to a substance is a risk factor. Even back in John Wayne movie days, John Wayne would say, "I don't trust a man who can't handle his liquor." Well, by having high tolerance to alcohol and or other drugs, it simply exposes the brain and the midbrain to higher levels of material and higher milligrams. So it increased the risk of addiction. Also, availability. We know we certainly live in a society where alcohol is readily available, cannabis becoming more and more available all the time, and due to many factors, illicit opioids, including fentanyl, become much more available. So ease of availability is a big risk factor. Environmental factors are also risk factors and contribute to addiction. Stress, I agree, who doesn't have a stressful lifestyle, but stresses that are put on us, either self-imposed or as a result of our addiction, increase cortisone releasing factor production, drive the dopamine tone down, and increase the risk of addiction. As we mentioned, with adverse childhood experiences, early physical or sexual abuse, having witnessed violence either as a child or an adult, peer influence cannot be underestimated. Do your friends drink and drug? High likelihood that you will, as well as drug or alcohol availability. At this point, I start discussing, okay, we know the risk factors of this. We know both environmental risk factors as well as developmental and psychiatric risk factors. So an important issue is a lot of us have some of these risk factors and simply don't get substance use disorder. So why is it 10 to 15% of the population gets it? Well, that's certainly a topic of high study in the last 10 years, and it's continued to be a topic of study, and where it leads most likely to, I thought I had one slide here, but I'll see it. Where it leads most likely to has to do with the dopamine subtype receptors. It turns out that 7 to 8 out of 10 people simply do not have the system that can accept these massive rewards. And even on a simpler note, this could be observed at, say, any restaurant in the country that you'd go, and someone's having a mixed drink, say margarita, and the owner of the restaurant comes around and says, you know, congratulations, you're our 100th customer, so we've decided to give you 5 free margaritas. It turns out 8 to 9 out of 10 people will simply decline it, And the reasoning would be, I don't like the way more than one makes me feel. Well, for any of us that suffer from substance use disorder, we know we would never say that. Of course, we would take 4 or 5, however many more they had. And the reason is we can accept that dopamine reward. We have a vulnerable dopamine reward system. Most current research points to that we have the D subtype 2 receptors that allow the hearing, if you will, of those massive releases of dopamine, where the rest of the population simply doesn't. They get dizzy, they get sweaty, nauseated, and they go, no, I really don't like the way 4 margaritas make me feel. Well, for those of us with that disease, we would never say that because we can accept the reward. The next part we're going to go to always reminds me of, I'm sure y'all remember the old OxyClean commercials where the fellow says, but wait, there's more. So on top of that, we become restless, irritable, and discontent due to this dysregulated dopamine reward system. Something very important happens. A phenomena occurs when the dopamine reward system is dysregulated. And this phenomena occurs in the prefrontal cortex that I'm going to show you here. The prefrontal cortex, our decision-making portion of the brain. This portion of our brain controls reasoning, planning, decision-making, critical thinking, problem solving, our sense of self-worth, value, self-control, and motivation. And here, this simply shows the prefrontal cortex and points to reality testing, error monitoring. It's referred to as top-down guidance, attention, and thought, inhibition of inappropriate actions, as well as regulating emotion. Decision-making, as I mentioned. Determining what's good, bad, or better, putting value on our actions. The right from wrong versus reward. Weighing consequences of future activities. Working towards a goal, problem solving, analyzing, predicting outcomes. Regulate impulse, compulsions, and drives. Social control, appropriateness, ability to suppress urges, socially unacceptable outcomes, inappropriate behavior, emotional processing, spirituality, love, depression, anxiety. When this dopamine reward system becomes dysregulated, we know from functional MRI scans that the oxygenated hemoglobin in the prefrontal cortex is decreased. A good analogy I use with patients and families is we've got a V8 motor and you're putting 60 octane gas in it. It simply doesn't run efficiently. And the confusing part is it still runs, but it doesn't run right. And the analogy I use a lot of times, it'd be comparable to an automobile that has faulty brakes. And you can't steer it. The car's moving just as we are in acute addiction and acute substance use disorder, but we have very little control of our ability to stop and start, especially the substance, and we have very little smart control over our behaviors or our steering. This is one example, and there's many. This one's from the National Institute of Health, but it shows where functional MRI scans actually show the metabolism and the anatomy that show this portion of the brain is functioning inadequately or insufficiently. And that really answers the question why addicts just can't stop. One, they're just like that little baby who's restless, irritable, discontent. Their brain remembers how to alleviate those symptoms, how to correct that situation, and their decision making does not function properly. That's why they just don't quit. And this is also why treatment is essential. You have to go past just fixing this brain chemistry. What we need to treat is the whole person. Pharmacological treatments, including anti-craving medications, including appropriate psychiatric medications, anti-anxiety, antidepressive, even other psychoactives such as antipsychotics may be necessary. Behavioral therapies, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy. That they have medical services, that the rest of their body is receiving appropriate care, their heart, their lungs, their endocrine system, all contribute to good chances of success with this disease when you're a physically healthy person. And social services, we are all too aware of just how much trouble we can get in surviving in today's world when addiction puts us in tough spots with both employment, relationships, ability to earn income, and our social context has a lot to do with the peers, who we associate with every day. Very important. Modern day treatment, only 1 in 10 Americans who need treatment actually receive it. Of those, approximately 95% don't think they need it. And that has to do with the prefrontal cortex. They can't judge out value of items. They can't make decisions. And remember, not only can't they stop their car, they can't turn it left or right, but the car is still moving. As you can see, most people that enter our system don't do it of their own free will. And they didn't think they needed it in the first place. There's very little public support for treatment and public funding for treatment of addiction, with less than 50% publicly funded. So our modern day treatment needs to address relationships, emotional distress or emotional situations, mental, neurological, social, physical, financial, legal, spiritual, occupational, physical manifestations. Drugs such as alcohol and benzodiazepines and opiates, particularly through the withdrawal phase, need expert medical attention to alleviate these symptoms and prevent possible death. They need help dealing with consequences of their use, consequences as far as work, legal system, relationships, help stabilizing their emotions. And very important, addressing shame and guilt, which for many patients that I deal with, and even for my own self, it was very important to know I had a disease. And I'm not necessarily just playing the victim card here. It's just the fact. I had a disease. I need not feel any more shame or guilt over having the disease of addiction than I should over being hypertensive or asthma or diabetes. And the support system, both helping the family, help the patient, and helping the family. This is a family disease. Our actions affect our family members. Issues in treatment. Many times there's residual brain damage. I may see an alcohol patient who's drank 20, 30, 40 years. Maybe they have Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome with decreased cognitive abilities. Maybe they have liver damage. Methamphetamine patients quite often have chronic dysphoria. High risk of relapse due to triggers and brain conditioning. We're going to show you a few slides in the future that talk about how society even influences this. Denial, I could stop anytime I want to. I made those choices of my own free will. Well, you may have thought it was your own free will, but we just saw from a dysfunction, the prefrontal cortex, our own free will is tainted, to say the least. Many of us, including myself, were faced with significant consequences as a result of the symptoms of addiction. Loss of ability to earn income, particularly would be one. Comorbid mental health conditions, depression, anxiety, mood disorders, all are common in early recovery and in active addiction also. You know, we know from many studies and simply good common sense, people don't just stop on their own. It's the normal thing to do is to continue to use. And we discussed many factors out there, ease of availability and lack of availability of appropriate treatment, and lack of treatment availability, and lack of ability to make the decision to go to treatment unless we have people, you know, influence us, appropriate intervention to get us to finally commit to treatment. As we've talked about before, willpower is not effective in the midbrain. I can't simply say, I don't want to be restless, irritable, discontent anymore, and it happened. I have no personal decision-making over how I feel based on that. We know that detox alone simply doesn't work. 95% of patients who detox only without any follow-up treatment relapse. So basically, detox may save you for a week. It may save you from life-threatening consequences of alcohol and drug use, but it's not going to put your addiction in remission. Medications alone are not effective in preventing relapse. Although we do have anti-craving medicines that are an effective tool to help, alone they simply won't work. There's no cure for addiction. However, it will go into remission. Diabetes is very similar. If a patient has a sedentary lifestyle and ate the wrong foods, they go back to those behaviors, the disease is going to come back. This one's no different. If you stop all your self-care and you start dabbling in mind-altering substances again, this disease will come back also. You know, multiple symptoms need to be addressed, as I talked before. Appropriate psychiatric care for anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, all of these have to be treated. The levels of care: detoxification, group therapy, educational lectures, individual therapy, a spiritual component, family therapy, networking, recreation, attendance, self-help groups, AA, NA, nutritional management, medical management, psychiatric management. A team approach is necessary. Treatment plus AA. AA has been studied. It's effective. It promotes abstinence. All types of treatment approaches improve abstinence, improves the brain chemistry, restores people to mental, physical, and spiritual health, helps prevent relapse, helps improve relationships, as well as new peer groups and other symptoms of addiction. Restores the careers of professionals. There's a lot of networking that happens in our 12-step mutual aids groups. Of those admitted to the US, 64% were re-entering treatment, including 23% for the second time, 22, third, fourth time, 19%, fifth or more time. The revolving door treatment. It's essential that this gets dealt with. So inadequate treatment non-compliance with treatment, incomplete treatment are the reasons for all this. Fragility of early recovery. In the first 6 months, particularly, relapse rates are high. Many times, the consequences of their use and their addictive lives play a big part of this. They don't have work, they don't have their family relationship, they don't have sober support groups. It's a very at-risk time. Once again, not much different than other diseases, relapse rates with hypertension, diabetes, asthma, first 3 to 6 months. Length of treatment is key. The longer we maintain abstinence under a supervised environment and continue to develop coping skills, appropriate medical and psychiatric treatment, it improves our prognosis. Combination, as we said, of all these is very important, as well as, once again, treatment of dual diagnosis cases. Where do we go from here? What we need to do, advance the science. More science needs to be done, particularly with each particular substance, particularly with methods of treatment. We saw with our pandemic much increase in what we're doing today, virtual conferencing, virtual therapy, especially when it relates to cognitive behavioral therapy. And with the advance of this science, easing the stigma. Words are sometimes painful. I even catch myself these days. When I say alcoholic, I kind of cringe a little bit. When I say addict, I kind of cringe a little bit. Words are painful, and unfortunately, those words carry a heavy connotation towards the bad person. So quite often now, I easily replace it with alcohol use disorder, substance use disorder, active addiction, and I tend to avoid the derogatory words. Thank you all very much. There's the book. It's available on Barnes & Noble and Amazon. It's $14.99. The Kindle version, $9.99. There's my Instagram page. There's my Facebook page, and there's our website. And there's John's continuing legal information that I'm sure you all need. And we still have a little time left for any questions.
We have some questions, Dr. Smith. Let me, and if anybody chats in that they can't read the CLE cert, I can post it probably in a larger section. But let's see, let's get to our questions here. We actually had some really good questions. Number one, do lawyers suffer from the stigma more than non-professional people? Dr. Smith?
Well, I think any professionals, certainly physicians, nurses, just imagine the stigma associated with airline pilots who have this disease. So lawyers would not be immune there. Anyone who the public safety is at risk. So you find out your attorney has substance use disorder and he's been defending you in critical life situations, that there's going to be a large stigma attached to that. So I would say healthcare professionals, attorneys, the more education you have and the more skills you have, the more scrutiny you get put under.
And then, so that would keep them from getting treatment as frequently as non-professionals seeking out the help. Okay.
Exactly. You know, I see our blue collar workers coming in much easier these days. They have employee assistance programs. They work for companies and businesses that understand this is a medical problem and it needs appropriate medical care. And on the other end, in long-term recovery, they have a better employee. They have a more productive employee. They have a happier employee. Unfortunately, I don't think that's translated in the professional realm yet.
Okay. We have another question here. Let's see. I'm manning the chat and this. Next question would be, actually, you know what, Dr. Smith, let me read off to people the link for the presentation. Okay, the reference number today is 2106976. N as in Nancy, and it is entitled KNOW Addiction, comma, NO Stigma. Again, that number is 2106976N. And getting back to our questions, Dr. Smith, the next question we have is high tolerance a genetic situation, or is it developed through repeated substance use?
Interesting. It's both. You know, quite often we're asked the nature versus nurture question. So in that list of risk factors we put up earlier, genetics is big and plays a large component, but the other factors such as adverse childhood experiences, age of early use, stressful lifestyle, and dual diagnosis also influence that. So it's at least 50-50 of who has the high tolerance. Partially that you were born with it, and partially you're a result of neuroplastic changes that happened as a result of your environment. Our actual brain changes that we went through as a result of environment changes, especially as pre-adolescent or adolescent.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm putting in the number. Excellent, Dr. Smith. Thank you so much. Hold on, I've got more. The questions are pouring in. Please describe symptoms of dysphoria. And I'm guessing they may look different, but I'm fascinated to hear what you have to say, Dr. Smith.
You know, that's just, I don't feel good. I'm not happy. I'm fatigued. I don't have energy. So if we were going to put the opposite of euphoria, where I'm elated, happy, energized, the opposite of that. Fatigue, sad, hopeless, all those would be dysphoria, including emotional and physical pain components. All those would combine to be the picture of dysphoria.
Okay. Let me check if there are any new questions, because I've got one that we'll wrap it up with if we don't have any new ones. I do have someone saying phenomenal presentation. I will be ordering the book. Good luck, Dr. Smith.
Thank you. Thank you.
And does the childhood trauma risk factor depend on whether the child is or was aware of the trauma? Does the childhood risk factor depend on whether the child is or was aware of the trauma?
No, it doesn't. And in fact, we have a section in the book where my co-author, Dr. Jason Hunt, had the phenomena himself of repressed childhood memories. He had trauma as a child from a stepfather who had cocaine addiction, that he actually went years and went through medical school and did not have memory of that himself. But through treatment and through therapy, they re-access these repressed memories. And certainly we became aware it's not important that you remember it, or it's not even important you're aware of it. It's just that these experiences happen at a very vulnerable time in your life as a preteen or teen, that your dopamine reward system is very vulnerable. So it's not important that you're aware of it or not.
Got it. I can attest to that. I grew up in a household I thought was normal. I realize now it was extremely violent, and upsetting. Um, Another question: is there a way to repair damage to the limbic system, or damage due to the limbic system? Okay,
Definitely.
hold on. Damage of the limbic system due to life, secondary to life. So
Yes, yes, there is. What we will always have is a vulnerable dopamine reward system. We will always have that based on both the genetics and our life experience risk factors that we have. What we do know, and I mentioned this in a previous slide, there is the big difficulty is it's going to take 2 years for this system to repair. This isn't an overnight thing. And it also doesn't go from 0 to 100 in repairs. We're looking at a 45-degree angle. Things are better in 3 months. Things are better in 6 months. Things are better at 1 year. It's really 2 years when we would expect emotions and reward to be normal again. There are rare cases, and I hate to even admit it, but the methamphetamine users or the 30, 40 years alcohol users may have so much damage to this system, they may never be able to resolve their dysphoria. That's the rare case, though. By far, 99% of patients that come through our treatment centers can restore their brains in perfect working order with good medical care, good psychiatric care, and healthy living. One of the things patients don't like to hear me say it, that I stress all the time, continued smokers keeps that system dysregulated because nicotine is 225. To be I use that old Army phrase, to be all you can be, but to be the best person you can be mentally, physically, and spiritually is no mind-altering substances. So I preach smoking cessation constantly.
okay. All right. We have one more question, Dr. Smith, and I think it's in my wheelhouse. So this question is: are lawyers required to report to Florida Lawyers Assistance if being treated for substance use disorder? Are they required?
I will refer that. I know about healthcare professionals, but I don't know about lawyers.
And then it said, if so, is there a monitoring program like there is for medical professionals? And I'm happy to answer that question as no, there is no requirement to report to FLA. You need not report to FLA. However, professionals, studies have shown in large numbers and well-established scientific evidence that professionals who have a monitoring system with the accountability and support combined, so there is that the reward as well as the well delineated interventions if you're having problems. Those people succeed in recovery at rates that are more than double those people who go through good treatment. So it's the monitoring that really has shown to make the difference. It's the long-term. Diabetes, you don't treat diabetes by putting someone in the hospital for 2 weeks and then sending them home saying, okay, now eat better and exercise. You check their blood sugar. You monitor them as they get into healthier patterns and that brain repairs and new pathways form. So, so if it's you, if it's a colleague, a friend, and you call Florida Lawyers Assistance, it's not necessary, but it's a great idea because we provide that same monitoring, the same support that airline pilots programs do that show about 94% recovery. 94%. The national averages for non-monitored professionals is, maybe around 40. A good general number is about 40%. So 94 for them. Doctors over 80%, 86% nationally. It was shown. Certain states, a low number was 72% when it was studied in states. And with lawyers, we're about 80% as well for those who who go through a monitoring program. So it's highly, highly successful and proven, and we would encourage you to call. And if you call us about yourself, about a colleague, about a loved one, it is totally confidential. So even if we contact someone and they refuse services, we don't report that anywhere. So thank you very much, and thanks for sticking with us. And I always go a couple minutes over because I can't stop talking. So thank you very much. And Dr. Smith, thank you, and good luck on the book. And we're going to, we'll be in touch. And I'm getting so much feedback. Fantastic presentation.
Thank you, John. Thank
Yeah, wonderful presentation. Thanks so much. Great insight. I learned a lot. I mean, there are just there's a score of different nice feedback here. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.